Look at almost any human society across the globe, and you will find a persistent hierarchy. Men disproportionately hold the structures of power, while women are placed in subordinate roles. Feminists identify this overarching system of male domination as patriarchy. To understand how the movement attempts to dismantle that system, you have to establish the absolute baseline concept of feminist theory, the distinction between sex and gender. Sex refers to observable biological differences, anatomy, chromosomes, and hormones. Gender, on the other hand, describes the roles, behaviors, and expectations a society assigns to people. It is a social construction. While the movement is united against patriarchy, it immediately splits into two major camps over how to view those gender differences. A minority group, difference feminists, argue that the distinct biological and cultural traits of women should be recognized and celebrated. But most of the movement belongs to equality feminism. Equality feminists argue that the concept of an innate female nature is a myth. Thinkers like Simone de Beauvoir reasoned that these alleged natural differences were deliberately invented by male-dominated societies to confine women and justify their oppression. So, while all feminists agree patriarchy is the enemy, their inability to agree on the exact nature of men and women splinters the ideology into four distinct strands of attack. The first major avenue of attack comes from liberal feminism. This strand focuses its energy on the public sphere, meaning the state, the legal system, and the formal workplace. They operate as reformists. Rather than demanding a violent revolution to tear down society, they use democratic pressure and legislation to slowly correct the negative consequences of oppression. Over the last century, this incremental approach secured immense legal victories. Women gained the right to vote, the right to legally own their own property, and eventually the passage of laws outlining unequal pay for the exact same work. In the mid-20th century, writers like Betty Friedan documented a widespread, severe dissatisfaction among women who were confined strictly to domestic lives. Liberal feminists championed the idea that women should have the freedom to choose their roles, leading to massive campaigns for workplace equality. For the liberal feminist, the state is a flawed machine. By removing discriminatory laws and outdated cultural attitudes, they aim to recalibrate that machine to provide true equality of opportunity. Socialist feminists argue that those legislative wins only treat the symptoms of inequality. They point to the economy as the root disease. In their view, capitalism requires patriarchy to function. The system relies heavily on women performing unpaid domestic labor, like raising the next generation of workers, and acting as a reserve army of cheap labor in the formal workforce. To fix this, they propose entirely new economic structures. This includes total financial independence for women, communal living arrangements, and turning private housework and childcare into professional, state-supported industries. Early advocates like Charlotte Perkins Gilman made the case that capitalism forces women to rely on their sexual assets to secure financial backing from a husband. She compared the financial arrangement of traditional marriage to prostitution. Therefore, socialist feminists conclude that passing equal pay acts means very little if the underlying capitalist structure still requires the exploitation of female labor to generate profit. Radical feminists look at both the liberal focus on law and the socialist focus on economics and argue they miss the true epicenter of oppression, the home. Their rallying cry is, "The personal is political." They assert that the private, domestic lives of women are actually deeply entrenched systems of power, domination, and subordination. To a radical feminist, the nuclear family is not a natural arrangement. It is a social construct specifically designed to socialize children, cementing patriarchal gender roles and the idea of male superiority from infancy. Because the root of the issue is so deeply embedded in private relationships, they demand a total revolution rather than reform. Thinkers like Germaine Greer called for the abandonment of traditional marriage, arguing that society had conditioned women to view their own sexual desires as unfeminine. This strand targets the entire structure of male-female relationships. They argue that you cannot legislate away a system that is quietly reinforced in every living room and bedroom in the country. By the late 20th century, a major critique emerged. These previous waves of feminism largely focused on the struggles of white, middle-class women, leaving millions out of the conversation entirely. This realization gave rise to postmodern and fourth-wave feminism, built firmly around the concept of intersectionality. Intersectionality highlights that characteristics like race, class, and sexual orientation do not exist independently. They overlap and compound to create unique, multi-layered experiences of patriarchal oppression. Scholars like Bell Hooks highlighted this complexity. A working-class Black woman experiences a very different form of systemic battle than a wealthy white woman. The matrix of discrimination involves multiple interacting structures. Because patriarchy operates differently depending on who it targets, postmodern feminism rejects the idea of a single, universal solution. The tactics used to fight it must be highly tailored and diverse. We now have 4 distinct battlegrounds. Liberal feminism targets the state. Socialist feminism targets the economy. Radical feminism targets the home. And postmodern feminism targets the overlapping intersections of identity. They frequently clash over methodology, debating whether the system needs careful reform or total revolution, and whether the female experience is universal or highly individualized. This intense ideological fragmentation might look like a vulnerability from the outside. In reality, it ensures that a pervasive, multifaceted system like patriarchy is constantly challenged from every conceivable angle. To see how these ideological frameworks apply to modern policy and history, subscribe to The Explainer. We break down the complex systems shaping our world, one video at a time.